As the darkness creeps in, shrouding the small town in an eerie silence, the residents begin to stir. The streets are dimly lit, with only a few faint streetlights casting an otherworldly glow. The air is heavy with an unspoken tension, like a storm on the horizon. And in the midst of this quiet unease, John's day begins. He wakes up to the soft hum of his alarm clock, his eyes fluttering open as he reaches over to turn it off. The room is dimly lit, the curtains drawn, but John can still make out the faint shapes of his wife, Sarah, and their two children, Emily and Michael, sleeping peacefully beside him. He lies back in bed, running a hand through his tousled hair, and slowly gets out of bed. Downstairs, the kitchen is already warm and inviting, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. John pours himself a cup, his mind already racing with the tasks ahead. He glances at the clock on the wall, 6:30 a.m., and knows he has just enough time to get ready for work before his family wakes up. Sarah, now awake, strolls into the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Good morning, John," she says, giving him a gentle smile. "Good morning, sweetheart," John replies, dropping a kiss on her forehead. "How did you sleep?" Sarah shrugs, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Like a rock." John smiles wryly. "Worse. I've been having weird dreams." Sarah raises an eyebrow. "Weird dreams? What kind?" John hesitates, unsure how to explain the fragmented images that still linger in his mind. "Just stuff," he says finally. "Nothing important." As they sip their coffee, the morning routine unfolded with a sense of normalcy. Emily and Michael stumbled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed, while John helped Sarah get them ready for school. The morning sun struggled to break through the clouds, casting a pale light over the small town. But as the day wore on, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A nagging sense of unease, like a faint hum in the distance, refused to dissipate. He brushed it off as mere nerves, but the feeling persisted, growing more insistent with each passing hour. It wasn't until he received a strange phone call at his office, the caller's voice unfamiliar and menacing, that the darkness outside began to seep in. "John, we know who you really are," the voice hissed before hanging up. John's heart raced as he stared at the phone, his mind racing with possibilities. That night, as he lay in bed, the unease turned to dread. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what. The dreams returned, this time more vivid, more disturbing. John woke up with a start, his heart racing, and glanced around the darkened room, his eyes searching for some sign of what was to come. The next day, John discovered a cryptic message on his car windshield. "You can't escape what's coming." The message sent a shiver down his spine as he wondered if it was just a prank or something more sinister. As the days passed, the messages continued, each one more ominous than the last. John began to feel like he was being watched, like someone was following him. The darkness outside began to mirror the turmoil within. It was on one particularly stormy night, as the rain pounded against the windows, that John's double life began to unravel. Sarah, her eyes narrowed with suspicion, confronted him about the strange phone calls and the cryptic messages. "They're not who you say you are you?" she accused, her voice trembling. John hesitated, his mind racing with the consequences of his deception. The weight of his lies finally crushed him, as he collapsed under the weight of his own secrets. As the truth emerged, John's world began to disintegrate. The facade of his normal life crumbled, revealing the twisted, contradictory lives he had led. His friends, family, and even his own loved ones were left to pick up the pieces, left to wonder how someone could lead such a duplicitous life without anyone suspecting a thing. As John sat in his darkest moment, his double life extinguished, he realized that the line between reality and fantasy was indeed thin, but only as thin as the thread of deception that had held his two lives together. As the truth about John's double life emerged, the town began to whisper about the man who had lived a lie for so long. The news spread like wildfire, and soon the entire town was talking about the accountant who had led a life of secrecy and deception. John's friends, who had once considered him a normal and trustworthy person, began to distance themselves from him. His colleagues at the office started to whisper behind his back, and the community that once saw him as one of their own began to reject him. Sarah, who had once loved John with all her heart, was devastated by the revelations. She felt betrayed, used, and manipulated by the man she thought she knew. As the days went by, their once strong bond began to unravel, and Sarah struggled to come to terms with the fact that her husband had lived a life of lies. As the investigation into John's double life continued, more secrets began to surface. It was discovered that John had been using his second identity to fund his lavish lifestyle, and that he had been embezzling money from his own company to support his alter ego. The townspeople were horrified by the extent of John's deceit, and soon he became a pariah in their eyes. The once respectable accountant was now seen as a master of deception, a man who had used his charm and good looks to manipulate and control those around him. As John sat in his cell, awaiting his trial, he realized that his double life had been a house of cards built on lies and deception. He had thought he could control the truth, but in the end it was the truth that had destroyed him. The town, once so enamored with John's charming facade, was now left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. They were left to wonder how they had been so blind, how they had failed to see the cracks in John's seemingly perfect facade. As the town began to heal and move on from the scandal, they couldn't help but feel a sense of shame and regret. They had thought they knew John, but in the end they had been deceived by his charming smile and his convincing lies. And John, locked away in his cell, was left to confront the consequences of his actions. He was left to wonder if he had ever truly been the man he claimed to be, or if he had just been a master of deception, playing a role for as long as he could get away with it. The truth, once so elusive, had finally caught up with John, and as he sat in his cell, he realized that the line between reality and fantasy was indeed thin, but only as thin as the thread of deception that had held his two lives together. As the days turned into weeks, John's thoughts became increasingly consumed by the consequences of his actions. He had lived a life of deception, and now he was paying the price. One day, as he sat in his cell, he received a visit from a woman named Emily. She was a journalist, and she had been investigating John's case. "I'm here to tell you that your story is not unique," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "Many people like you, who have lived a life of deception, have ended up in this very same place." John looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of shock and anger. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice laced with hostility. Over the next few weeks, Emily visited John several more times. She told him stories of people who had lived a life of deception, just like him. As the days turned into weeks, John began to see the world in a different light. He realized that deception was not unique to him. He began to wonder what would happen if he told the truth. Would others forgive him or reject him? Only time would tell. As Sarah came to visit him, John felt a mix of hope and fear. She no longer looked at him with pure anger, but with something closer to understanding. They talked, and John realized she had changed too. She had survived her own pain. John felt hope for the first time in a long while, but he knew the road ahead would be long. He had to choose, continue living a lie or tell the truth. He decided to write a confession letter to his family and friends. When he finished, he felt relief. For the first time, he had told the truth. As he walked out of his cell, he felt free. But the world outside was not easy. People still looked at him with suspicion. He worked to rebuild his life, slowly. Some people forgave him, others did not. But he kept going. As months passed, John reflected on everything he had done. He thought about the people he had hurt, but also about what he had learned: honesty, truth, forgiveness. He understood that change was possible, and that he had to earn trust again, not demand it. Slowly, his life began to rebuild. He found work again. He tried to live honestly, and although he would never forget his past, he no longer let it define him. As he looked to the future, he understood something simple. Everyone makes mistakes, but not everyone learns from them, and he had chosen to learn. The end.